Okay, I guess we'll start. Does anyone have any questions before we start? We need some serious crowd control here today. Okay, so this is something I worked on for quite a few hours actually. And it's a kind of revision accessory or a revision guide or a revision help kit or whatever you want to call it, help a revision spreadsheet. And basically what I did to make this spreadsheet is I went through every slide that you see on Moodle, and then I wrote down the important topics, the testable topics and the testable subjects, and I put them into different categories. Right, there are lots of tools in this module, so I have like the tools in a column, right? Java, Javadoc, IntelliJ, JShell, Git, GitLab, Git Messages, Maven, Gradle, JavaFX, FXML, JUnit, and then some extra ones. Oh, I see JShell is in both, so that's a little error. Right, there are lots of tools in this module. I have a column on general maintainability principles. This spreadsheet is on Moodle, by the way. Right, coding conventions, modularity, reusability, analyzability, testability, modifiability, corrective maintenance, adaptive maintenance, perfective, preventive maintenance, version control, checkout, commit, and so on. So there's some redundancy here, right? Because some topics fit in more than one category. The two biggest columns are object-oriented software design and programming in Java. Right, and there are all of the different subjects and themes and terms that we went over in the module, which is kind of a lot when you see them all in a list like that. But you can imagine any test questions on any of these topics. Right, so there's quite a few, and hopefully if you're not sure about any of these, you can ask now, by the way, or you can look at the slides in the lecture recordings to review any of the ones you're not sure about. So these are all the Java programming topics we covered. And there were also example applications. So we talked about like the Zookeeper application, the library booking system application in one lecture, the drawing editor in multiple lectures. That was a reoccurring example in the object-oriented design methodology lectures. The inventory manager was a short example in the slides. And the phone app was mostly in the lab, one of the labs. So there wasn't really much lecture material, but anyways, the exam might reference some of these applications and say, imagine you have this application that you're trying to develop, and it may ask you some questions based on those example applications. There was UML, right? A bunch of diagrams in UML. And yeah, I mean, if you're trying to create a UML diagram, it's good to have a reference book, right? You can get a free reference book from freetechbooks.com, for example. And you can also just Google like UML class diagram, hit search, and then click on images, and you see lots of examples. Right? Probably you've done something like that. Those are the ones that were discussed in lecture. Design patterns were discussed in lecture, and those are the different ones we discussed. And the open source software has a small mention here as well. And I just also, what I did was whenever I saw a link to a resource in the lecture slides, I just put it in this spreadsheet as well. So these were all like links to further reading and like helpful reading and so on the different topics that we gave out. There are some URLs missing there, and those are the ones that I created myself, like how to set up IntelliJ from scratch, for example, how to get GitLab set up, how to get JavaFX set up, how to get a Gradle project set up, how to get a Maven project set up, how to get a JUnit testing set up. But those are given on Moodle as links directly, right? Those screen capture demo videos. So they're not in this list. These are the URLs that are in the slides themselves. Any question about that? Any questions about any of these topics? I can give a few hints about the test if you like. Is anybody interested in some hints? Yeah. So in previous years, and by the way, I'm going to put up some sample test questions on Moodle this week. So I have a set of sample questions that you can use to get an idea about the style and some practice questions. But in the practice exam questions, there's not much emphasis on the object-oriented design. So I've put in a little bit more object-oriented design questions in this year's exam. So make sure you have object-oriented design covered. There were also times in the lecture where I said, oh, that would make a good test question. And I put it in the test, actually. I looked at my own lectures to see, because I couldn't remember exactly. And then I actually made some test questions based on my own talking to myself, basically, and giving the lecture. Another hint is we did some exercises in class. You might want to look at that material. Do you guys remember which exercises we did in class? Anyways, we did some exercises in class, and they are good candidates for test questions as well. If you do an exercise in class, that usually means the topic is important. So, yeah, and if it's important, it's a good test candidate. Okay, I think that's all I really have to say. I spent quite a few hours putting together this spreadsheet, going through every slide. So I hope that this is a nice help for everybody. The exam is TakeHome. It's an online TakeHome exam, so you just download a Word document and then you'll start filling it in. Another hint would be, there could be some drawing aspects, like illustrate this concept or provide an illustration of this. So you might want to familiarize yourself with how to create an illustration. Like some people use PowerPoint. Some people might use some other drawing editor. Some people might use a pencil and paper and then attach it as a photograph or something like that, or scan it. But there is some drawing aspects to the test. So I think that's a good hint. You won't need any calculators. You just need to know the stuff we talked about. I don't think we ever used a calculator in this module, did we? I don't think so. No really interesting numbers per se. Yeah. Or formulas. Any comments, questions about the test? Do you guys think you will score well on the tests? Do you imagine scoring well? I guess it's too early. I guess everybody's just focused on the coursework for now. It's probably too early to have a revision lecture. I guess they have not released the revision, the test schedule yet. Does anybody?
Yeah, we have.
You do have a test schedule. Okay. Do you know when this one is?
Not off the top of my head.
Mm-hmm.
If you can, I can probably get it. It's just like, it's not giving me an error when we try and get it. Oh, not that way. The 26th of January.
26th of January.
Yeah, at 2 o'clock.
Okay, okay. It's a 2-hour exam, by the way. So another hint. Okay, well, I guess we'll finish there. If you guys have no questions, if you feel, if you have no questions, then we'll just stop. You're welcome to ask questions anytime, but I will make a request to ask them on the questions channel of Teams, or ask them in the lab. We will have a lab this Thursday. It'll be interesting to see how many people show up to that lab, but yeah, a few students requested a lab this Thursday, so we will have one. So you can ask questions in lab or in the questions channel of Teams, the DMS team. Sound good?
Yeah. So
Okay.
is there any past papers or anything?
Yes, I'm going to put one on Moodle this week. Yes, yes. Any other questions? Any concepts that you guys are lost or clueless on?
When you were talking about the example applications being in the exam, what do you mean by that? Like how are they going to be in the exam?
For example, like in the practice test that I haven't uploaded it yet, there's the zoo application and there's a UML diagram of a zoo application, a class diagram. It says like, this is what the zoo application looks like in UML notation. And then there are some questions, like how could you modify this zoo application to make it more modular or reusable or improve the design and stuff like that. Okay. Yeah, so you don't want to be surprised at some sample application appearing on the test. Yeah, there could be a question, for example, about the drawing editor, right? Or there could also be a new application. Right? It doesn't have to be these ones. Yeah, but you might be given, for example, a little requirement specification. Like here's a partial requirement specification, and then based on this partial requirement specification, answer some questions. Yeah, things like that.
Is there going to be any actual like coding in the exam?
It is a possibility, like write a procedure that does this.
Okay.
That is a possibility, yes. But we don't tend to have anything complicated, like write a procedure that's, I don't know,
What is the time of this exam?
2 hours.
2 hours.
2 hours, yeah. There don't tend to be any complicated algorithms or anything in the exam, because it's not an algorithms exam. It's probably more common to see some code and then answer questions based on code that you can see, rather than writing code from scratch. But it's not going to be ruled out, like writing some code from scratch, like something like, here's a method. How would you modify this method in order to enforce encapsulation, for example? Or here's a class. How would you support encapsulation or information hiding, in this class? Something like that could easily be a test question. And if you go for a job interview as a developer, you will get some of these questions. Yeah, like if you go for a job interview as a Google developer, they will ask you these questions, like, what is polymorphism? Can you give me an example of method overloading? What is meant by encapsulation? Describe multiple inheritance. You will get those questions, actually. So this module has direct real-world connections. And if you're interested, on the YouTube channel that I manage, I have a special lecture on job interviews and how to prepare for them. So if you look in there, you can find one, actually. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, we'll stop if there are no questions. Yeah.